Hi, Caleb.
Yes, Adrian.
Caleb. Yeah, Adrian here. How's it going?
Hi, I'm good. And yourself?
Not too bad. Thanks for
Good to hear
agreeing
from you.
to do an interview.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So yeah, if you could just your name's Caleb, and what topic or what issue would you like to discuss today?
Today, I just wanted to bring up the topic of just living as a black person in Canada and Victoria specifically.
Okay, great. That's very timely, for sure. Um, yeah. Please. Did you want to just start, or do you want me to ask a few questions, or how do you want to proceed?
Well, I mean, if you have any questions that you have in mind, or if you've had any questions that you've ever thought about, I'm glad to answer them. But if not, I can go right into it too.
Yeah. Why don't you go right into it, and then if I have questions along the way, I'll chime in.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, to start, I would like to say, my name is Caleb Isaac. I'm 19. I'm a student at UVic currently, and I moved to Canada when I was about 1 year old, a little over one, from a small country on the west coast or east coast of Africa, actually called Eritrea. So when I came here, I practically grew up as a Canadian. Like Canada is really my home. This is the place that I've lived the majority of my life.
Right.
So, you know, at first, especially in Canada, racism isn't a topic that we hear every day. It's not something that's spoken about, especially not until recently. So growing up as a young kid, I always had friends that were majority white, other than friends that were practically family. So, I knew a lot of things about hockey and this and that, obviously because it's a big culture here. And, even the first sport I played was soccer and hockey. And it was different because I didn't have that, that typical black culture around me. So, I didn't know how people thought differently, like how people were expecting different from me when I was growing up. And the only time I really first noticed, especially maybe we could say racism around me, was, I think it was around the 7th grade. Someone said to me, "You don't play basketball?" ? And I said, "No, I'm a soccer player." And they go, "And you're smart?" I'm surprised. And
Oh.
I've never heard that before. It was something I never heard in my life before, like someone being surprised that I was smart. And I just thought, well, some humans are very smart, some humans are not, right?
Yeah.
But that was the first time I ever heard that. And I went and asked my mom and dad why someone would be so surprised I was smart. And that's when I first got the real conversation at home.
Wow.
That people saw us differently. And that's when my eyes opened and everything kind of changed in my life. And then the thing is, once you understand racism, or once you understand the prejudice and difference people see, you start noticing it everywhere, really.
Interesting.
Yeah. So to go off of that, did you have something to say?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let me, just before we go too far ahead then and forget, let's go back. So a couple things you mentioned, I just made a note here. So you mentioned that you didn't grow up in our culture here in typical black culture, or around typical black culture. When you say typical black culture, what do you mean by that exactly?
When I say I didn't grow up in I should say maybe not typical, but the stereotypical black culture. I didn't grow up around playing basketball and listening to rap music, and even though there's a lot of things I like to do today, it wasn't the things that my friends like to do. It wasn't the things that I would do on the playground. It wasn't the things that were on the priority of what I wanted to do in my free time. A lot of my friends who are still good friends of mine today, and they'll always be. Is the first thing we do is we go out and play road hockey, or we'd go and a lot of my friends listen to country music, things like that. So I have an understanding of I personally I love rap music, I love hip hop, I love R&B, but I also have an appreciation for the country music, and I have an appreciation for other things. But it's the second I started becoming a fan of rap music, I could see the difference between my friends and how they looked at me. You know what I mean?
Interesting. And then so just to build on that, another question would be so you were in 7th grade, the first sort of time, I guess, that you sort of your eyes were open to this, could I say, or that this became a phenomenon that you noticed?
Yeah, it was the first time that, not that I've heard, understood racism or heard about racism, but it was the first time I noticed that prejudice towards me. Like I
Right.
heard someone openly ask me a question that it just didn't seem valid because you know the saying I don't see color.
Yeah.
Like of course we all see if a person is darker or lighter, but I
Yeah.
didn't at that age, you know, being very naive and innocent, you could say. If I saw an Asian person or a black person or a white person, I just took them for who they were, not what they looked like.
Right.
So I didn't have any assumptions about their intelligence or their athletic ability
Right.
or things, anything like that until someone said it to me. Then, you know, if once someone tells you that, you have those thoughts. You would never assume those things.
Yeah, because you think all people are thinking this about me, or think how many other people are wondering this about me, or thinking these.
Exactly.
Right?
And then it makes you think about it too, about others slowly. Sadly, but slowly, you start getting those thoughts.
Yeah, no, I could see that, and then it's almost like when you're out and about in public, and like you said, you notice it more. Like the things that seem like small things that maybe innocent things previously might look like they have some more meaning behind them. Like if the bus driver doesn't accept your bus fare, or something like that. I'm just trying to think of some examples. But
or even suspicions, like which I'll get into in a bit. But there's just little things where you notice you're picked out from everyone else around you.
Right. Okay. So the two last questions then before we move on. So how old was this person your age, or was it like an adult, or like who asked you like that they couldn't believe that you didn't play basketball, or if they?
Well, they were older than me. It was a high school. Well, when I was in grade 7, we go to like a high school that we'd go to and do like a shadow day, right?
Right. Okay.
And I had a brother of an older friend of mine, his older brother.
Okay.
Came up to me and he was like, "So what are you doing these days?" And I remember him asking me if I play basketball, if I was going to play on the team, and I was like, "No, I want to play on the soccer team." And then he goes like, "What classes are you interested in?" And I was talking about all these like physics and this and that, and he was expecting me just to care about sports or becoming an artist. The stereotypical black success story.
Interesting. And I'm just curious though. So his brother, who was your friend, had he ever had any, have you ever had a conversation with him about this kind of stuff, or did he sort of just like did neither of you see color? Like you're both just two friends. One happens to be black, and one is, I'm assuming he's white.
Yeah, he's white. Yeah, I never really heard anything from him that alarmed me or brought these kind of thoughts before, but I think part of that had to do with the fact that we were both young. We were both still had that innocence in a way.
Yeah, so I guess I'm just wondering, like, as an outsider, like, being a white, identifying as a white, or presenting as a white person, is it something like with age maybe that, like, do our prejudices sort of seep in at a certain age, and when is that age, or why is it? Is it because the parents at home talk about these things, or they saw something on TV, or is it, you know what I mean? Like, it's just interesting. Like, so at elementary school, did you feel like prior to grade 7, let's say, prior to when you heard this comment, in your earlier years, did it seem fairly equal? Like all things were fairly equal, or like you weren't treated any differently?
It's funny you ask that actually, because once I, as I grow up and I reflect on my life, the things I notice are like there's certain situations where I know things were probably more racist than I realized.
Right.
But at the time, I just thought it was my fault, or I was doing something wrong, or it was just a coincidence where someone didn't like me.
Right.
When in reality, I did nothing to deserve the situations I was in. Especially looking on to after grade 7 and once I entered high school, because once a big part of racism is like the fear of black people, especially the fear of black men. You see a lot of that.
Right.
So as I aged and got older, you go through puberty and you get older and you look more like an adult. Then I feel like that you notice it a lot more because in reality, especially with the fear of black people, what's a black 12-year-old really gonna do to you? You know what I mean?
Right.
That's the mentality at least. Where no one thinks they're gonna get robbed by a 12-year-old black boy, but when you're 17 or 16 or 15, running alone at night, then you see people looking at you differently. Or if you're shopping alone in a store that's a little more expensive than what they think the owner might think you can afford for one.
Interesting. And so you noticed this firsthand?
Multiple times, yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, those are all my questions up to now. Please continue.
All right. Sounds good. Well, as I was saying, it was around that age of grade 7 where everything started to kind of notice. And then I went to high school, And the first thing that happened, I remember, was the basketball coaches were all coming up to me and my cousin. And my cousin's a great basketball player. He's very good. He was probably the star at our high school throughout all of the time he was there. But when they came up to me, it was just like, I was like, no, I don't play basketball. And it was just so funny how shocked they were again.
Right.
And I was like, this is interesting. I'm like, I have a friend who's like 6'4", and they're not even worried if he plays basketball or not. You know what I mean? He's the one who's actually built to play basketball, because I'm like, what, 5'10", 5'11". I was really skinny at the time. I was built to play soccer. You know, I was a winger.
Right.
That was my job, and that's what I like to do. And it really makes sense, because if you really get to know me, I'm African, and Africa has way deeper roots in soccer.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's when I started noticing, really, that, you know, there was some stereotypes. But it didn't bother me, because I didn't take it as an insult. I took it as, you know, they just assume I'm a soccer player, or a basketball player. You know, I almost took it as a compliment. But it became a problem later in life when I went out, and, for example, I just a question for you. Do you ever, like, when you go to the airport, what's the normal procedure for you?
Like for security, or?
Yeah.
We go to security. Last time we flew was we flew to Kelowna. My wife and I, with our son, who was just about to turn 2, and it was pretty standard. It didn't felt. Funnily enough, I will add, my wife always, and she presents as white as well. She always gets singled out for the body scans and the. So it's just kind of a running thing between us. The few times we've flown, it's always been her that's been on her honeymoon. For instance, a few years back, she was like, you know, had to take off her shoes and all that kind of stuff. So she's the one. But you know, me personally, and you know, I haven't really felt like I've been singled out or anything.
Yeah, I'm glad that, like, you know, that our airports are very secure these days, and obviously there is a realistic terror threat out there. But at the same time, I always noticed that I think since I was about in high school, I've almost never went on a trip without at least once or twice being singled out and getting body checked,
Wow.
having to go through extra checks.
Wow.
And the funny thing is, if you look at my passport, I'm a Canadian citizen. I've been a Canadian citizen from literally the day I was born, because my father was already a Canadian citizen. He lived here, actually, at the time I was born, even though I was born in Africa.
Right.
So it's, you know, realistically, there's nothing that makes me or my white friend different if we're flying in the same plane, you know?
Yeah.
The only thing is, I was born in an East African country, and there are terrorists who live relatively close, like, that are terrorist organizations. But the irony about it is, there's no terrorist organizations in the country I'm from.
Interesting.
Even if there were, you know, it would be such a small percentage. And it's just to assume the one person who's lived in Canada their whole life, you know, there's nothing about me that even relates to that side of the world, and in that light, at least, like with terrorism, that would even lead, you know, security to even assume that I would be any kind of threat to that plane. You know, I'm just as nervous about terrorism going on a plane as any white person.
Yeah. Well, and your name is Caleb Isaac. Like, it doesn't
exactly
set off any alarm bells or anything, right? In terms of what's happened in the last 20 years.
And even if my name was like, I don't know, Muhammad Abdullah,
right,
for example.
Right.
If I lived in Canada my whole life, what makes that a security guard assume that there could even be ties to terrorism? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there was one thing that I noticed, and then even at first, I remember asking my dad, why me? Why did they choose to check me?
Wow.
And he goes, and they didn't even choose my father. But the difference between me and my father is I'm a little lighter skinned,
right,
which makes me look a little more Arab, and I have soft curls.
Right.
And then he said, he told me, he's like, I'm gonna be straight up with you. He said, son, it's gonna happen. Get used to it. He goes, ever since 9/11, if you look a little bit like an Arab person or like anybody from that region,
right,
they're gonna check you. And he goes, it's sad, but it's the reality of the world we live in. And he goes, as a black man, as a lighter skinned black man, you're gonna see a lot of problems like these, light or dark, and you're just gonna have to go through life with it. And you're at a disadvantage from birth. But if you look at it from a different light, you can always make it your advantage. And that's something I always keep with me. And my father let me know that even though the most obvious disadvantage I have will put me behind in some ways. If I use it the right way and, find ways to use it to my advantage, I can put myself 10 steps forward and use it as an outlet, as a voice, as a purpose in life.
Right. Yeah. No.
Just like we're having this conversation right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No. This is very productive, and that's exactly why I have this, is so and we can all hear these things, right? Because like I said, as a white person is going through my world and my life as a white person, I don't feel these things or experience them. They might not even be on my radar, right? Apart from what I see on the news and such, right? So I had three things that I want. So one thing was, we've heard of the phenomenon of a quote unquote flying while Arab, just like driving while black. So I do think, since 9/11 happened, definitely. And so it's almost like, unfortunately, you get it twice, right? Being, say, as you say, a lighter skinned black man, maybe profiled when you fly and profiled when you drive. I don't know.
Well, definitely. But the nice thing about that is, I will admit that or Victoria, I should say, because this is where I live. The police have been really nice here, and I feel comfortable around police officers. If there was a problem, I would talk to the police. There is a sense of security that I do feel from the police, in the sense that I don't feel that my life is at risk, which is something I'm very grateful for.
Yeah,
but I feel like that is also a very sad problem that happens a lot in other countries and other cities, maybe even in bigger cities other than Victoria. But I found that the Saanich PD, which is the police department in my area specifically, have been good. But there are still instances, like I drive an all-black BMW,
right,
and I'm a black man who likes to listen to rap music with I have a nice subwoofer in the car, and if police see that, I do get followed a lot. That does happen. I do get trailed. It's never ended in a illegal or bad situation, but it's not very unfortunate or comfortable to have to be in the car or feel like a burden to your white friends when all of a sudden police are following you for the next 10 to 15 minutes.
Definitely. Yeah, no, that's yeah, I'm sorry. But I am also grateful to hear that, you've had a good experience with the police departments, with the Saanich Police Department, at least in our city. I'm sure they'd be happy to hear that as well, because, what we do see on the media, like for me, my interpretation is, as a young black man especially, your parents at a certain age, like you said, maybe when you reach the age of people might perceive you as a threat, they have that talk with you, that you need to be worried about, not so much, look up to the police as someone who could save you from a situation, but someone to be avoided, kind of thing. So,
and to go on that, it's definitely not like as much of a threat as a lot of people might think in Victoria, but at the same time, I do have to be a little cautious, because my parents always told me, like, if you ever do end up in a situation, you're gonna go out, you're gonna be with your friends, sometimes fights happen and this and that. When that situation does arise and the police are involved, they're gonna assume, there's a chance that they're gonna assume that you're part of the problem. You have to be ready to be a suspect. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if you're in that coincidence, or if you're in that any situation where you could be part of the issue, I always am ready to be like ruled as a suspect first, to be the initial thought of the the antagonist of the situation.
Yeah, no, that's so. Like, if you were with, say, three or four of your white friends, and something happened nearby or something, and you guys got pulled over, you might be singled out.
Well, it's things like that, or let's say, like, I can give you an example. This is a bit of a more unfortunate one, but one time me and my friends were downtown not long ago, and I remember there was a kid who we knew who was being really rude, and he was, just using racial slurs.
Wow.
He was throwing the N-word around, talking, about our sisters and this and that. He was just going really deep into, like, personal spots that no one should ever have, like, things that no one should ever have to hear, especially as a black person. And one of my friends, he couldn't handle it. Like, I was just trying to walk away, trying to ignore him. But one of my friends just hit him really hard, and it became a little physical. And people saw it around, they called the police. And I told them we need to go now, because this could, it could escalate way worse than it is.
Yeah.
And as soon as the police came over, I remember I was just standing in the corner, And the first thing they did was come to me and talk to me like, what's going on? What happened here? What did you do?
Wow.
And I might have said 2 sentences throughout the whole situation.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting that, there's a racist white kid standing maybe 5-10 meters away from me. And, the police instantly came to me. There was 3-4 male police officers and 1 female police officer.
Mm-hmm.
And they were asking for my name, what happened, what the problem was. And I was like, listen, I am not involved in this in any way. Like, if anything, I'm a victim here.
Yeah.
I tried to direct them to the person. And they were refusing to go talk to him. They just
Wow.
wanted to hear everything from me.
Wow.
And I was like, listen, I can tell you what happened to me. But they were asking me questions in an interrogation form almost.
Right.
It wasn't like, are you okay? Or are you hurt? Like, do you need help? It was more, what did you do?
Right.
How did this start? Could this have been prevented? Like, they were almost trying to scold me for even being there. But unlike anyone else, I'm just trying to have fun at the bars with my friends.
Yeah. Were those 3 police officers white?
Yeah, all the police officers were white. There was 1 female and 3 male. And, obviously I felt a little more comfortable with the female because
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like the female was being a little more, she almost had that more mother instinct to her. She was just looking at me as a kid.
Right.
And the 3 male, not all of them were bad, but I remember one specifically. He was grilling me like, and I respect being treated like a man.
Yeah.
But he was grilling me as if I was a guilty man.
Yeah. Right.
And at one point, I just told him, like, I have the right not to cooperate with you right now because you're not, like, accusing me of anything. You're not detaining me. You're not arresting me. Therefore, I can walk away. I'm trying to be respectful, so I asked for some respect. And the female cop stepped in and actually, she vouched for me. And she was like, we don't know this kid did anything. He doesn't look like he was fighting. He has no cut, scars, nothing. He looks like everyone else around here. And she's like, I understand where you're coming from. She's like, and it's during this whole Black Lives Matter situation. So,
yeah,
she really understood. And from then on, she worked with me to the situation. I just told her, like, me and my friends were being, like, kind of
verbally
accused by these people. And we just wanted to go our way.
Yeah.
And she listened. She went and talked to those guys. She let us go really quickly. So if she remembers that situation, I hope she hears me. And shout out to them.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a positive experience, but something that could have gone differently with, say, a different police officer, or had it just been the one by himself and, maybe in a different location, different time of day. That brings me to my last sort of piece that I had about what you were saying initially about flying and everything is, as we have more people of color in those positions, say as border security agents or transport security or police officers, do you think there will be a difference, or have you noticed a difference already, say, in how, as we have more, basically representation on, say, more Asian police officers or Indigenous or Black? Have you noticed a difference, or do you think there will be a difference? Is that a way to promote a difference?
Definitely. I agree. I think that's a great way to promote a difference, because if I was to be pulled over and I saw a Black person, I'd feel a lot more comfortable, because they're not going to think I'm any less or, any more susceptible to doing something bad, because we live the same life, we live the same experience in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And even with the airport, like when I went to Denver a couple of years ago, I had the same situation where I was, asked to move across, and then I asked. I was, at this time I was curious, and I was maybe 16 or 17, and I was just a little frustrated. I asked the security officer why I was chosen, and she goes, "It was random selection," and I'm like, I just asked her, I was like, "It's interesting. I'm always in random selection." It was maybe like the last 4 to 5 flights, I've always been random selection.
Mm-hmm.
And she literally told me, she was just like, "Don't make this hard. Just move across and do what I tell you." And I said no. I was like, no, I want that guy to do it. So I asked. There was a Black man standing over there doing the other thing, and she's like, "You're really gonna make this troublesome?" And I said, "No. After you want me to go through security, I feel more comfortable if he checks me."
Right.
And when the Black man came over, he took me through the scan one more time, and he literally looked at me. He goes, "I don't feel you need to be scanned. Have a nice day." He didn't even do a body check, nothing.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just interesting that she had no reason to select like nothing on the metal detector beat, nothing in my bag was suspicious because he did the whole run through again.
Yeah.
And he just looked at me and said, "Have a nice day."
No. And this was, you were on a family trip or just with friends, or it was
on a family trip? Yeah.
Yeah. And like your family waiting sort of, after, like on the other side of security, they've already gone through.
Yeah, because they went through a different lane. I believe it was his actually.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Because it was like a heavy lineup, so we both kind of went into the lane beside each other just to save time.
So let's say you had a choice then, I guess, essentially to be in the line where there was, say, a black, someone who presented as black, a security officer, and someone who was white. Would you, if you had a choice, an option, would you go with the black person?
I hate to say it, but yeah, I would.
Right. And why do you hate to say it?
Because I know a lot of these white people doing security are good people too, and it's not like all of them are gonna be like this. But it's like, how do I know? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because like, how do I know? It's hard. You can't spot out a racist. You can't. There's no the people say the stereotype is the Trump supporter, this or that, but you can't spot out the person really. They could be a business class, upper class, a lawyer. You really don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So if I see a black person, I know they feel me in a way that it's personal to them. They understand my situation in a more personal level because they experienced it.
Okay.
So their assumptions about me are equal. I feel like I'm treated equally.
Good. So then I guess two questions, or one comment and one question that stems from that. I would say it's overall a positive thing, I guess, if, say, the people in positions of power or authority, say whether it's lawyers or even doctors or police officers, represent the population that they are serving, or that they might come into contact with. So, I mean, as I'm talking to you, I'm just thinking, a more ideal world would be one where, let's say we do have, let's say 5% of Victoria's population presents as black or identifies as black, and that's maybe even a bit high of a number, but would 5% of the officers that you see, like, would they be black? And say the doctors, and like, is that sort of a better society where, there's, a contingent of our fellow, people who present as we do in those positions?
Of course, I think it creates a world that, how many, like, for example, a question I could send back to you is, how many black politicians can you name in Victoria or in British Columbia?
In British Columbia and Victoria, obviously Shamarka Dubois, our city councillor, and then I actually do know the name of our very first black councillor, which is, as an interesting factoid for people listening, he was elected in, I think it was 1860. Which is very interesting in and of itself, the time period. And his name was, last name was Gibbs. He was, there's a Miffler Gibbs or something.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm an unfair person. I probably made that a bit difficult. Most people, I don't think, could name one.
Well, no, I mean, even that you did name, you only named two, and
yeah, exactly.
And I mean, and it wasn't that you didn't know him; you actually knew more than the average person. And one of them isn't in today's
one was like
world.
Centuries ago. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the situation in America. How many black presidents can you name? One, obviously.
Yeah, right.
And how long will it be till we see another one? And same with Victoria, I'm a political science student at UVic, and that's kind of the area that I want to go into for this purpose. And this is one of the things that inspired me, one of the topics. And it's mainly because I just want, when I have children and they have friends that are black, I want them to see a leader that not only looks like them, but they can feel, I'm not saying that a black person in power is going to guarantee a better life for black people, but it gives them some sort of feeling of, okay, there's a guy there who's making laws, not only from the perspective of only white people, only people of privilege, but he's making laws that affect everyone. Because my initial thought whenever I do anything is not only for just, a privileged situation, because that's not the situation I have. So it's easier for me to take into account everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not only black people, because that privilege that I don't get to share is not only me. Indigenous people don't have that privilege. And in Canada, they might have it the worst even.
Mm-hmm.
And so on. So I think seeing more of a mix of people in power, a mix of races at least, even and religion, it makes a more wholesome government because there's so many perspectives are like it's one of the most powerful tools I think that you could use in politics because it's hard for anyone to understand a situation other than theirs, and it's hard to blame them for not understanding them. But what you can blame them for is how they go about fixing that problem. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the easiest ways to fix it is by fair representation.
Right. Fair representation. Yeah. Okay, that's a good way to sum that up. So then here's my other thing, my question. Is it fair to say, or maybe it's unfair to say, I really don't know, is it an assumption on our part or on a person's part, say, let's say I was an Indigenous man, you know, if I felt that, okay, if there are more Indigenous police officers, I will be treated better or more humanely or more justly. And here's the question, sometimes do I think, is it maybe the individual personality, more so than like maybe there is an Indigenous police officer who sort of looks down on Indigenous people or has a complex where, you know, he doesn't want to, you know, he feels, you know, like ashamed or something. So he takes it out on, you know, he's even harder on, you know, we hear about Uncle Toms in the United States, you know, say a black man who sort of, you know, is a white man's servant or something.
Exactly.
And so my question is sort of, you know, is there an argument, like as a white person, sometimes I think, do we need affirmative action type policies or fair representation policies? Like, is it maybe just about individual personalities? Like, is it wrong? Maybe are we being a bit naive or to assume that just because someone is a certain color that they will give someone a more just opportunity, or, you know, and sometimes too, it's the other element to this last piece is the structure, the system. So sometimes, let's say, like I could maybe make the argument, you know, and again, not knowing much about the police service, but there is maybe an argument to be made that the police service attracts a certain type of personality, you know, or the bravado or sort of the camaraderie or the fraternity that exists within the police service, black or white. They don't see that; they just see the badge, and so they're more about the badge than about the color. So a black police officer pulling over a black man might not treat him any differently than a racist white police officer. So I'll leave that there and let you comment or pull apart any of that you like.
For sure. And I'm glad you asked that. And I feel like a lot of people who are white are afraid to ask that in today's world because they feel like it might come across as a more racist question, but it really isn't because it's a valid question and it's one of the questions that lead to the steps of helping the situation. So I'm really glad you asked that, Adrian. But to start with the first part about is it the person or the personality? The thing is, of course, that situation can happen, but the overall point of having like the fair representation or equal representation is it's not to do just only with the fact that a black person is black and they're doing that job, but let's give an example. Have you ever heard of like Indigenous reconciliation?
Yes.
Well, I just wrote a paper on that actually, or I'm writing a paper on that, and the way they built this system or group, it was called the TRC, which is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, was through stories of Indigenous people. Like, you know, it's hard to make affirmative action policies or laws without the input from the people who are affected by it, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you had these people in power, it would make that situation a lot easier because you see it a lot where they try to make these laws on their own. You know, they just try to, like, we hear our prime minister talk about situations with Indigenous rights and black rights. And at the same time, we see situations like Jody Wilson-Raybould, right?
Mm-hmm.
A BC native, actually. Someone who went to UVic. But it's interesting because it's hard for a person of color to see how genuine that effort is to make a change through affirmative action and stuff without the input from people who experience it themselves.
Right.
So that's the importance of having them in power or as a police officer or in the institutions that control these problems. You know, I'm not saying, that one black person might have that opinion that you said, but I guarantee all six of them won't. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's just like the bad apple in the police. Like, I'm not saying all white police officers are bad, but if there's one, that's more than enough.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one person's enough to take away one life.
Right.
One person's enough to have one. If you have one bad experience and it happens to be your first bad experience with police, it will change your thought forever, or at least for a long time.
Right.
So that's where that thought of having colored people, and I don't even like using the term colored because we really are all colored a different way. You know what I mean?
Right.
I should say people from other cultures in those institutions. And to go back to the second part of that, which was, I believe you were talking about the institutions. The whole situation with the institution is quite similar because you hear the term like the unjust, judiciary system or so on. And again, those situations are fixed by having people in those institutions who are at the higher levels, not only just the counselors, but the people who have the right to make those laws changed. They don't have to be of that color, but they have to work with them. You know what I mean? If you want to fix a certain situation, you have to do it with the people who are involved with it. You can't do it alone. You have to hear it from them.
Right.
Like if you're gonna bring an affirmative action policy that helps Indigenous people in, let's say, for financial problems, go out to the Indigenous community. Listen to what their hardest parts of living in Canada financially are. You have to, make these laws with them. Create a community. Create a board of Indigenous people. And you can involve those white people who are in power in that board. Obviously, you have to, but they can't be doing it alone because at the end of the day, you can't fix something unless you felt the pain of the problem.
Right.
Yeah, and there's another thing that goes with that. Like those are always two things I always bring up. You can't fix something unless you feel the pain of the problem, and I feel like that one kind of has a ring to it. Or don't hate, educate. That's my thing. Like whenever I feel hate or racism, to end this topic, I say don't hate, educate to all my black friends because I see racism not only as a hate, but it's also an ignorance. Because you're not taught racism, or you're not born with racism, you're taught that.
Right.
Just like I didn't understand racism fully as a young person, as you said earlier. It's something I realized later. I didn't understand it. I was so innocent or naive, some people might say.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that was possible. So I had to be taught what racism was. And if everyone didn't have that, feeling of racism or understanding of racism, it wouldn't be there.
Mm-hmm.
That son who said something mean to me downtown, someone or something he heard brought him to that opinion.
Right.
And we all know it's wrong. Maybe not all of us, but most people realize it's wrong. But for some reason, that kid has a situation that changed him to be that way. So the only way he could change is if he sees a black person and gets a good influence off of him. So I tried not to hate. I tried to educate. That's my big thing.
That's very, very enlightened and really humbling to listen to. That's really nice.
Thank you.
One thing that sprung out of that for me was my son. He's 3 years old now, and I noticed even a difference in the toys, I guess. I'm 33, and so the difference in toys from when I was his age and sort of his age and the colors of the represented colors of the little people and the figurines that he has. So there's like the Playmobil and the Little People series. And he's actually got, I know there's an Indigenous female presented, there's a black male presented, and I was watching him there to see if he would say anything or notice a difference between the two or treat them any differently, and he didn't. I thought that was really interesting. They were the same, and it wasn't, if they were different, it's because one was dressed in construction gear and one was a teacher. It wasn't because he didn't comment or even really notice the color of the skin. So I think I'll watch him as he gets older. I'm just curious when we start to really see color, as you say.
Yeah. And it's definitely a good thing because, I grew up in a world where I had no, you could say black superheroes, or in the movies, the black guy was always the rapper, the basketball player, or the thief.
Right.
You know what I mean? You're either there was only two ways to be successful. You were an athlete or you were a musician.
Right.
And if you weren't successful, you had to be bad. And that was, from the screenplays. So when we see things like the Black Panther, where a 3-year-old black and white person can grow up and see that, there's a black guy in the movie that's just as great and just as powerful as the white guy.
Right.
That's movies and, toys and TV shows are the first real education for the kids, young children. So if you know there even within toys, you see that fair representation makes a difference. You know,
Yeah.
Know that your son will see a black person just as successful or just as useful as that white person with his characters in his toys. That's how he's gonna see the world initially. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's really nice.
Yeah.
It's really
So
positive.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's something a lot of people don't see, and just the simple things like that, having black and white people being the same, and even the smallest of things makes a big difference later on in their lives.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is, that's a very good chat we've just had, and I don't want to, cut you off if there's anything else you'd like to add. I've pretty much said, I think, everything that I could think of to say. Is there anything that you felt, is there still something burning in the back of your mind or that you want to get off your chest or?
Well, I mean, this topic we could obviously go on forever because it's such a deep and personal topic, but I think other than what we covered, I'm just glad that people like you are out there who are willing to bring up this topic, and I want to just give you thanks and a shout out for that because even though it's not a topic that seems so prevalent in Canada, it still exists, and it's not something we talk about every day in our country as if we lived in America, but it's a conversation that still needs to happen, and it goes farther than just black people. It's indigenous people too. It's all races, Indians, as in like Indians of Asia,
Right.
and it's every culture. It's still prevalent in this country. You might not think it's as bad, but that doesn't make a difference. If it's wrong, it's wrong. And I'm really glad that you gave me the time and acknowledge that this situation is there. So good on you for doing this.
Well, thank you for taking the time, and like you said, don't hate, educate. I really like
Exactly.
it. I'll put that on a t-shirt. Yeah.
Maybe it needs to be done.
All right, man. Yeah.
All right.
All right, Caleb, I really appreciate it. And check out the podcast. I'll have it posted within the next week here, and I'll send you the link.
For sure. Thank you, Adrian.
Thanks, Caleb. All right.
Have a good day.
We'll talk soon.
All right, for sure.
Okay. Bye-bye.